The winner of American Idol is Jamal Robert.
We all remember Jamal Robert standing under the bright lights of American Idol, his voice shaking the hearts of millions. But what if I told you that behind the cameras was a heartbreaking story that never made it to TV? A story of loss, struggle, and silent tears hidden behind his smile. This isn't just a tale of a singer, it's the story of a man broken behind the fame. As a reporter who has covered countless stories in the entertainment world, few have gripped me like the early life of Jamal Robert. Born into poverty in a small Alabama town, Jamal's life was marked by absence and hardship from the very beginning. His father walked out when he was just 3 years old, leaving his mother to raise him and his siblings while juggling multiple jobs just to keep the lights on. There were no piano lessons or vocal coaches in Jamal's world. His first exposure to music came in the form of gospel hymns softly sung by his mother in their cramped kitchen while cooking rice and canned beans. Those melodies were his lullabies, his only escape. But that voice, that quiet, golden voice, remained hidden. At school, Jamal was the shy kid in the back, the one teachers forgot and classmates mocked. Once, during a class art session, a teacher overheard him humming to himself and forced him to sing in front of the class. Laughter erupted. But amidst the mockery, one person, his music teacher, Miss Clara, sensed something deeper, something haunting in his tone. She tried to encourage him, but life didn't give Jamal many chances. He slept on floors, stood in soup kitchen lines, and lived with the constant pressure of survival. Still, the songs in his head never stopped playing. They became his shield and his secret. This was not just a childhood marked by poverty, it was one overshadowed by emotional wounds that would take years to heal. The world never saw this part of Jamal. All they saw later was the boy who sang on TV. But this is where his true story begins, in silence, in struggle, in a home where hope had to fight to survive. As a journalist, I've encountered numerous stories of raw talent lost to circumstance, but Jamal's tale stands out as especially painful. By the age of 13, Jamal had almost entirely given up on singing, not due to a lack of love for music, but because of the psychological scars left by years of bullying, poverty, and silence. While other kids his age were performing at school talent shows or joining choirs, Jamal was scrubbing floors and cleaning houses with his mother just to help pay bills. Miss Clara, the teacher who believed in him, continued urging him to join local music festivals, but Jamal always declined. Once, a church community even raised money so he could travel to a youth singing event, but when the day arrived, he panicked and never showed up. And then came a moment of sheer coincidence that changed everything. One evening, while waiting at a bus stop for his mother to finish her night shift, Jamal began softly singing a Sam Cooke tune. Unbeknownst to him, a stranger nearby, a volunteer from a local street music charity, recorded the impromptu performance and posted the 48-second clip to YouTube. It didn't go viral in the traditional sense, but it did reach enough people to stir quiet buzz. One indie music producer from New Orleans even commented on the clip. But Jamal didn't see it. He didn't have internet at home. Weeks later, a friend showed him the video on a borrowed phone. His reaction was a mix of awe and fear. "Why are people watching me?" he asked. He wasn't ready to be seen, not yet. For years, his voice had been his own private world. And now that world was peeking out into the light, trembling and unsure. I've attended dozens of televised auditions in my career, but few have ever hit me the way Jamal Robert's American Idol audition did. When Jamal arrived at the venue, he wasn't accompanied by a PR agent or a manager. He didn't even have a proper pair of shoes. His community church members had pooled together enough money for him to travel to the audition, and he came wearing a borrowed shirt and nerves of steel. According to production staff, he stood outside the building for over an hour, unsure whether to walk in. But he did. And when he finally stood in front of judges Simon Cowell, Katy Perry, and Lionel Richie, the room shifted. I was stationed behind the camera crew, and I'll never forget the silence that fell when Jamal began singing, "A Change Is Gonna Come." It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it was real, achingly real. It was the voice of a boy who had endured too much, too early. Simon's eyes narrowed, then softened. Katy Perry's lip trembled. Lionel Richie's jaw tightened with emotion. When the last note faded, Jamal looked like he wanted to run. Instead, Simon uttered, "That's the realest thing I've heard all day." Lionel gave him a hug. Katy wiped her tears. But Jamal? He just stood there, shell-shocked, unsure what he had just done. That moment wasn't just a great audition. It was a catharsis. It was a child finally being heard in a world that had silenced him for so long. For me, watching from just a few feet away, it felt like history was quietly being made. As someone who has tracked the journeys of rising stars from the moment they step into the limelight, I've seen how sudden fame can lift or crush a person. With Jamal, it was both. After his audition aired, social media exploded. His name trended across platforms, his clips were shared endlessly, and his follower count skyrocketed overnight. But while the world was celebrating, Jamal was trying to survive the emotional aftershock. He had never owned a smartphone until the show's producers handed him one. He didn't know what a press junket was, nor how to act during interviews. The glitz of television and the scripted smiles of fame felt unnatural to him. One night, after a live taping, I found him sitting alone in the dressing room hallway. I asked if he was okay, and he simply replied, "I miss my mom's cooking." That's the thing. While the world was ready to crown him a star, Jamal still longed for the normalcy of his tiny kitchen, the smell of fried onions, the creaky floor of their old apartment. He began to feel isolated. Some people in the industry tried to mold him. Let's get him a stylist. He needs better stage presence. Can he do pop instead of soul? I saw the pressure closing in, threatening to mute the very voice we all fell in love with. Fans only saw the clips that made it to air. But behind the scenes, Jamal was quietly breaking, torn between the dream he was living and the world he had left behind. Of all the tragedies I've witnessed in this industry, none hit quite like the loss that struck Jamal during his American Idol run. It was the week before the finale, and Jamal had just finished rehearsal when he received the call. His mother had collapsed from a heart attack during her overnight shift at a food processing plant. Within hours, he was on a flight back to Alabama. By the time he arrived, it was too late. She was gone. The woman who had sung him to sleep, who had scraped coins together for his bus fare, who had believed in his dream when no one else did, was now a memory. The news sent shockwaves through the production team. Filming was paused. Judges reached out privately. But the hardest moment came when Jamal returned to the Idol stage a week later. He insisted on performing. "She would have wanted me to," he said. That night, he sang Bridge Over Troubled Water, and it was unlike anything I've ever heard. Every note trembled with grief. Every lyric bled with love. By the final chorus, the audience was in tears. Even Simon Cowell, known for his stoic demeanor, walked onto the stage and embraced him silently. It wasn't just a performance. It was a farewell. It was a son singing for his mother one last time. That moment, captured in the glow of stage lights, revealed the true soul of Jamal Robert, not just a contestant, but a human being who turned his pain into art in front of millions. And it left all of us, reporters and viewers alike, forever changed. From my position in the press row during the American Idol finale, it was clear the night carried a weight far heavier than just announcing a winner. For Jamal Robert, the finale wasn't about fame, fan votes, or topping the charts. It was about resilience, about honoring his mother, and about finding the courage to stand tall even while hollowed out by grief. When his name was announced as one of the final contenders, the audience roared, but Jamal's eyes only scanned the crowd, quietly searching for a face that would never appear in the audience again. That night, instead of choosing a flashy, up-tempo track like most finalists, Jamal made a risky choice. He performed a stripped-down acoustic rendition of Stand By Me. There were no backup dancers, no extravagant lights, just him, a stool, and a soft spotlight. As his voice rose and cracked mid-song, I could see some producers backstage shaking their heads, worried it wasn't TV-friendly. But something miraculous happened. The audience, first stunned, slowly began rising to their feet, some placing hands over their hearts, others wiping away tears. And when the final chord hit, there was a silence so profound it rang louder than any applause. Jamal didn't win the title that night. Another contestant with more polished media presence did. But even as confetti fell around someone else, all anyone backstage could talk about was Jamal. The judges whispered among themselves, the camera crew exchanged glances, and even the sound technicians agreed. "That kid," one of them said, "he gave us something real." Winning would have been nice, but Jamal's finale was a declaration. He had arrived not as a contestant, but as an artist molded by pain, love, and unshakable authenticity. It's often said that reality television only shows the surface, and as someone who's covered American Idol for years, I can confirm that statement tenfold. In Jamal Roberts' case, what the public saw was only a fraction of the emotional storm swirling just beneath the edited clips and backstage interviews. What the show didn't air was how Jamal would arrive at rehearsals hours early, not for extra vocal practice, but to sit quietly alone and write letters to his late mother in a small leather-bound notebook he carried everywhere. It didn't show the night he had a breakdown in the bathroom after accidentally overhearing another contestant joking about playing the sympathy card. It didn't show the producers debating whether to include more emotional backstory in the final edit, only to opt out for fear it would be too heavy for primetime. I witnessed these moments firsthand. The trembling hands as he clutched a photo of his mom before a live show, the quick, forced smiles during press segments, the weight he carried like a silent burden. One evening, while waiting for transport back to the hotel, Jamal confided in me. "I feel like I'm living in two worlds," he said. "One where I'm supposed to perform and another where I'm just trying not to fall apart." These are the cracks the camera never captured, the unfiltered humanity left on the cutting room floor. American Idol gave Jamal exposure, yes, but it also presented a version of him that was neatly packaged and incomplete. The real story was rawer, deeper, and far more fragile than whatever made it to air. The lights of the American Idol stage dimmed, and with them so did much of the public attention. But for Jamal, what came next was perhaps the most difficult chapter of all. As a reporter, I've seen many contestants walk off that stage with dreams in their eyes, only to be met with silence and closed doors. Jamal returned to Alabama with little more than a suitcase and a few thousand Instagram followers. There were promises, record deals, guest appearances, interviews, but most of them faded within weeks. A small independent label offered him a contract, but when he read the fine print, he realized he'd be giving up creative control over his music. "I already lost control once," he told me. "I won't lose my voice again." He turned it down. Without a manager or an agent, Jamal began uploading raw, unedited covers to YouTube, using borrowed recording equipment from his old church. The numbers were modest, but the comments were filled with loyal fans, many of whom had followed him since Idol. He played small gigs at local cafes, sometimes performing to crowds of just a dozen people. And yet, there was a kind of peace in it. "At least I know they're here for the music," he said. Fame had come and gone like a summer storm, but what remained was Jamal's voice, his story, and his refusal to become something he wasn't. In an industry that often rewards the polished over the authentic, Jamal chose the harder path. And for those of us who continue to follow his journey, that decision made him more powerful than any contract ever could. I've reported on many fan movements over the years, but none as quietly powerful as the grassroots community that formed around Jamal Robert. While he may not have reached viral superstardom, what he built was something arguably more meaningful. A devoted following that resonated deeply with his truth. They called themselves the Bridgewalkers, a nod to his emotional rendition of Bridge Over Troubled Water, and they weren't your average fan club. These were teachers, single moms, teenagers struggling with mental health, and even veterans battling PTSD, people who saw their pain mirrored in Jamal's voice. They organized online listening parties, sent him care packages, and raised money for a scholarship in his mother's name. One particular fan, a retired nurse from Ohio, began translating Jamal's lyrics into Braille for blind students. Another wrote a children's book inspired by his story. Jamal, ever humble, responded with handwritten thank you notes and impromptu video messages. He didn't have a PR team crafting tweets. His posts were raw, honest, sometimes grammatically imperfect, but always deeply human. In a world saturated with curated influencer content, Jamal's digital presence felt like a breath of real air. And the fan base? They stayed. Through album delays, through social media hiatuses, through long silences. They didn't follow him for glamour, they followed him for heart, for truth, for the courage to stand in front of the world, fractured and flawed, and still sing. As I sit back and reflect on Jamal Robert's journey, not just as a reporter, but as a witness to something deeply human, I can't help but believe that his story was never meant to be confined to a competition or a single season of television. Jamal's legacy, still unfolding, isn't defined by Billboard charts or platinum records. It's defined by how he made people feel, how he gave voice to silence, how he turned personal sorrow into collective healing. In 2025, he launched a nonprofit foundation in honor of his mother, aimed at providing musical instruments and lessons to underprivileged youth in rural communities. "No kid should have to choose between food and music," he said at the launch event, his eyes misty but proud. He's also begun mentoring aspiring singers, not for clout, but because he knows exactly how it feels to be unseen. He still sings, still writes, and though the mainstream spotlight may have shifted, the fire inside him continues to burn. As a journalist, I often chase stories for headlines. But with Jamal, the story chased me. It clung to my conscience, echoed in my thoughts, and reminded me why storytelling matters in the first place. His is a legacy of authenticity, of refusing to conform, of walking through fire and emerging with a song. And in an era where so much feels artificial, Jamal Robert remains a voice we didn't know we needed, but one we'll never forget.